are now tuned into the truth frequency.
Your protection from deception. This is Truth Frequency Radio.
Hello and welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us again this evening. We appreciate all of you taking the time to be with us. As always, we're always grateful to have the time to fellowship with all of you and to have your attention in sharing all the secrets and revelations that we bring forward on this particular show and the TFR as platform for truth. It's a great honor to be part of this family and part of this group. I know that really we are shaking up the world with regard to paradigm shifting truths. And so I have as guest with me again, author Gary Wayne. Gary, you there, brother?
I am, and so happy to be back with you again tonight, Zen. Looking forward to a terrific show.
Yeah, I'm excited as well. Every time we get together, it seems like we are able to work off and play off of each other and bringing forth the eccentric research that both of us have done, and the listening audience really appreciates the dialogue that we share. I know that there's a lot of views and a lot of commentaries on the programs that we did last week, and for those that did miss them, they are available on YouTube under Endeavor Freedom or Zen Garcia. You can go there to check it out. But before we get started, Gary, if you would just give out your website, your contact information, and also about your book and the one that you have upcoming as well.
Okay. So easiest way to get a hold of me for people is to get a hold of me through Facebook under Gary Wayne, and I also have a group that I contribute called Gary Wayne, the Genesis 6 Conspiracy. And if you get a hold of me with a comment or a question, I will get back to you on it. If you're looking for to get a hold of me in other ways, you can get a hold of me through email on my website. And the website is Genesis 6 Conspiracy. That's Genesis 6 with the number 6conspiracy.com. And on that website, you can order a signed copy of my book if you like. And you can also connect into barnesandnoble.com and amazon.com and amazon.ca from there, as well as into the Kindle version. And you can also follow me on Twitter at GaryWayne63, at GaryWayne63.
Awesome. All right. Well, we appreciate, all that you already have done with regard to the research you've put forth. And so if you would talk a little bit about the upcoming publication and the research that you're doing now.
Yeah, so the book that I'm working on right now ventures a little bit away from the Genesis 6 Conspiracy, although the publisher is looking for me to do a sequel on that, but we'll have a look at that maybe down the road. But in the meantime, I'm into a book that is exploring the Holy Covenant and the curses and the blessings that come out of the Holy Covenant and the trials and tribulations of the Holy Covenant of Israel and of Judah, and the difference between Judah and Israel when it applies to prophecy and what is going to happen with Israel in the end time and with Judah, and that they play, a significantly larger role than most people would, from a Christian perspective, would give them credit for, and to be able to understand the difference between the role of the church and Israel and Judah, and then also culminating with the second Exodus. So that's essentially the storyline of the book, and to try and follow the lost tribes of Israel and then match that up with end time prophecy with their awakening.
Excellent. Well, I think one of the themes that you probably have interwoven into this book is the connections with the Men of Renown and the Knights of Malta, as it has been really from Atlantean times. That the New World Order is nothing new. It's, in my opinion, I trace it back to Isaiah 14, which we spoke about in great detail a couple shows ago, talking about when Lucifer, the moment that he decided to attempt to overthrow Yeshua and the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and to establish himself as being like the Most High, that in my opinion, that this is the moment when iniquity was found within him, and also the moment when he conceived a thought and a plan to orchestrate um, basically global domination and the New World Order, and establishing, the whole uh, getting the angels to join him in temptation, the rebellion, the war in heaven, and what has now led to the enmity between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent. And we see this division even with the Roman Catholic Church as being, a counterfeit of the original and the usurpation, because he always takes over from the top down and orchestrates through the various organizations that come into being, whether he sets them up or the secret societies set them up, or they just take them over and then control them from the top down. That seems to be the modus operandi. And so can you talk about the topic that you'd like to go into this evening, and also connect it to the work that you've done, and give us a kind of general overview, and then we'll go into it in more detail.
Yeah, I think, when we're talking about the Knights of Malta and the ancient connections and end time connections and the Roman Church, it has so many arms and tentacles to it, right, and so many connections, and they sort of go underexplored and overlooked. And so I think the fastest way to sort of encapsulate what is going on here is that whether or not it's the Templar dream, which was passed on to Freemasonry through a different avenue, and to the Knights of Malta for a different avenue, is the dream has always been for these secret societies that are meshed with the royal bloodlines, to bring about a new world order or a new Nephilim order. And it's a knight order or a warrior class that mixes with sort of a priesthood, which is, again, kind of typical of that ancient hierarchy and organizational structure that comes out of prehistory. And they take a lot of the symbology, with them that comes out of prehistory. And people may be familiar with the Maltese cross that is, part of not only the temple fame, but also of the Knights of Malta. Well, that goes back to Sumeria, and there's actually reliefs of Anunnaki with the Maltese cross on it. And again, that's not a coincidence. And you have also coming out of prehistory the double-headed eagle, or the double-headed phoenix, or the double-headed Anunnaki. And typically the source of that is this two-headed Anunnaki bird-like figure coming out of Sumeria again. So this is sort of the symbology that has reached into, beyond the flood and into modern times and all throughout history, because you're going to see this iconology follow and help identify these organizations as they march through history and into time. And then the other sort of symbology that people should keep in mind is the double cross, as in the double cross of Lorraine, or the double cross that is on an Oreo cookie, which also incidentally has a Maltese cross, is that is also a heraldic bloodline mark of additional bloodlines. And where cross originally forms in ancient history is from the double-sided or two-headed axe. So if you were to take a line and connect the smaller line, which is on the top on both sides, the bottom cross on both sides, it actually would form a ancient axe. And what's important about that is that is, the axe of ruling with the ancient Sumerians and the Anunnaki. So that is the double cross sort of staff symbol that you see that goes along with them. And so this symbology is important to understand because it is kept alive in these heraldic orders. And when I talk about heraldic orders, I'm talking about those who are coming from a common gens or a common family or a common bloodline and common patriarchs, because again, that's all sort of tied in. And we need to understand the connection between warrior class orders, priests, and royal families, because those are the top two castes that were created in ancient time, and we actually see that still in place in some countries and places of the world today. But in this ruling class of warriors, kings, and priests, this is the makeup of the secret societies combined with polytheist religions or Gnostic religions that have rolled into everywhere, as you were alluding to, even into the Roman Church, and I think with the current Pope for sure, that is working together to bring it back in a universal way this ancient order where you had the Nephilim king or the Nephilim descended king possibly in the end, with the ruling Babylon religion. And you also have the mighty men and the warrior class and the Gibberim that are going to also support it. And those are also the royal and noble families that are going to be the kings of the earth in the end time. So that's kind of the sort of overview of what I think we're going to be digging into tonight, and trying to get into the layers of what that means, and stemming out of the one sort of central organization that's left today that connects to all these other organizations, and that's the Knights of Malta.
We talked about also in previous shows, like about the Maccabees 4 and Antiochus Epiphanes, how he was trying to get the high priest Eleazar to eat food sacrificed unto swine, and then also his children. And we see that he had around him these lion men of Moab, these hybrid beings. And I think also that's a reflection of how it has always been going back in the ancient times too. You see that it was through, as you said, the priesthoods, even like these beings found in Paracas, with the elongated skulls, and Tutankhamun, and the ancient Egyptian reliefs of all these hybrid beings with half human and half, the animal heads on top of human bodies. Even Thoth is shown with an ibis's head, and just weird accounts all throughout history of these particular hybrid beings, but they were always the ruling class. And they even the Emerald Tablets, they speak of these serpent-headed beings as being the ones, the interdimensional, and taking over the rulership. But another thing with regard to the symbology, as you were stating and speaking about, with the phoenix and the double-headed eagle, and even the eagle here in America, and other connections, the dragon, in my opinion, it represents all kind of similarities, the phoenix as to the feathered serpent, and the connections to the Nakash. And we see that in the Freemasonic orders and the secret societies, that they worship trees, and they worship, the sun as a symbol of Lucifer, the shining one, and also phallic symbols, and also, any sexual icon, that they are really into the whole, as far as incorporating into their worship and their religion, sexual deviance. And even with the establishment of temple prostitutes, and the whole thing of prostitution being connected to Ishtar, and the establishment of it way back in ancient times. And so these kind of things were incorporated into these Bacchian fertility, orgiastic feasts and celebrations. And they would often do these kind of things even with the sacrifice of children, and the screaming of them as they offered them in sacrifice on passing them through the fire, and these kind of things. Just really abominable and sadistic behaviors, the drinking of blood, cutting out the still beating hearts of victims, all these kind of weird things that are associated to the worship. And we see that even in the lady that came out, Savali, who was part of some of these Illuminati families and talked about being in underground underneath the Vatican and being put through a ritual where she watched a child being sacrificed on a black obsidian table, and the people, the elites that were around there, and then she exposed a lot of the things that they were doing, even in this day and age. And this was just not even long ago. An investigative reporter, Greg Zemansky, did a whole series with her, but she ended up disappearing and probably ended up paying for the things that she brought forth to truth. But it does give us an inside perspective on the kind of things that are hush hush, and that because of the secret societies and the blood oaths and the oaths to not reveal anything of what they do, these kind of things have remained secretive for very long time, and those people that do say anything have lost their lives, and that is also incorporated into the oaths that they take. And so, can you speak about that as well, as far as the organizational structure of these particular brotherhoods and sisterhoods, and some of the connections between them? Because people don't realize, like the Shriners and the Masons and all, because they think of them as groups that help the community. They're out there doing their fundraisers on the side of the street and raising these funds, but people don't realize that at the highest levels, the people that are ruling over and that control the money, they are really evil and part of those groups that are dedicated and of their father, the devil, and that they worship these dark entities and very dark ritual.
Yeah, and even though all of these organizations are directionally heading in the same direction, it doesn't mean like it's a completely monolithic movement. And there's certainly two sort of centers as I sort of look at it. So you've got a Vatican-based center movement that is definitely trying to create the New World Order, but with Rome and the Pope as the leader of that New World Order, or the new Nephilim order. And then you have organizations like the Freemasons and the Rosicrucians, who are trying to create the New World Order. They want a universal religion, but they don't necessarily want the Vatican to be ahead of it. So even though they're all working in the same direction, you have different sort of an end game as to who's going to be controlling who. But ultimately, I think who wins out in the initial part is that it's going to be the universal religion that actually brings about the New World Order and the 10-King Empire. But then again, I think there's a revenge that happens, because Antichrist, along with the 10 kings, are going to destroy Babylon. So it will be a short-lived victory by the Romans. So within the Roman sort of secret society agenda, and again, it shouldn't be no surprise, as just touching on what you're talking about earlier, that we've got these rituals that take place within the Roman Church, because as you say that, as you said earlier, Zen, that the MO is to get control of the organization with your people, and in this case, Gnostics. The Gnostics have been molded into the church right from the beginning, who enabled them to get control, and even to control to the extent where you had and we don't know how many of the popes have these bloodlines, but you have like the Orsini family that produced three popes, with Celestine III and Nicholas III and Benedict VIII, were from the Orsini family, whom, although they like to downplay this, they take their bloodlines back to the Julio-Claudian gens out of Rome, or Julius Caesar and Claudius. And of course, those senators and rulers and noble classes out of Rome took their lineages right back to their gods, right? Just as all of the royal families did. So they were able, from very early on, able to get control with the bloodlines within the church, let alone having bloodline control over the thrones that are around the earth. So within the church, you have several different groups, and the monastic order aspect is one part that has always been the base. So where you had the Augustines, and you had the Calabrian monks, and you had the Benedictine monks, and you had the Cistercian monks. These are the ones who were able to put together the five main knight orders from within the church, called the Knights of St. Sepulchre, which the current leader of Malta was actually a leader of. You have the Knights of Malta, also known as the Knights of St. John, or the Knights of Rhodes as you go through history, the Knights of the Temple, the Teutonic Knights, and the Knights of St. Jacques de la Paix. Those are the five major ones that these Gnostic moles, through the monastic organizations, were able to get into the church all around after 1000 CE, and the Knights of St. John, named after John the Baptist, but also understand that Gnostics also draft John the Baptist as being part of their movement. So it's a nice, easy play for them to do this, to use St. John. That gets formed in 1023. So it was the Knights Templar gets formed in about 1090, and even though the Templars fall in 1307, the Knights of Malta continue, and you have a number of the Templars that are going into the Knights of Malta, as well as into Freemasonry, and as well as into Portugal. So they just didn't disappear. The Templar movement continued from within the church, but it's these Gnostic orders that form the Templars, that form all of the major secret societies that you have today. First with the Rosicrucians, starting in around 1188 at the cutting of the elm, where the Priory of Sion leaves the Knights Templar, and they're going to form groups. The main groups are, because there's a hierarchy where these ones are going to answer to, they're going to form Freemasonry early on in the 1300s, and the first orders are going to show up in about 1320 to 1325. You got the Rosicrucians, who predate that, and they also are forming the Sarcani Rond, or the Order Draconis, in 1400 to regain the thrones in Europe for the dragon kingships and the pursuits of Thoth, or the type of science and religion that they want chased after within their organization and belief system. The Illuminati in the 1500s, even though some people think they're created in the 1700s. They also create the Jesuits within the church in the 1500s. And incidentally, the Jesuits, two of the main formers of the founding members, Ignatius of Loyola and I think Farber is the other name, they were both Bezikis or Basques, and they are another royal bloodline. And they interpret the Bible through the seven sacred sciences. And so you have the Jesuits and the Knights of Malta within the church that have been not working necessarily monolithic, and depending on who's been the Pope, how that's been run. But now, and why it's important to understand this relationship, is you have a Jesuit on the Pope, or on the throne of the Vatican, and he forced the former leader of the Knights of Malta down about a year or so ago, named Festos, and has and promoted up a fellow by the name of Della Torre, and it's a very long name. Try and get the whole name out. It's very, very long. And now he was, elected again as Prince of Malta for life. just recently, I think May 2nd or so. He's permanently in place now. So you've got, with a Jesuit on the throne in the Vatican, in control of the Jesuit organization, in charge of the Knights of Malta organization, and all these other Gnostic orders that are still operating within the church, all sort of consolidated under their power. So it's positioning nicely. Now, you also have an order that crosses over called the Knights of St. John of Jerusalem.
Hold on, we'll be right back, everyone, and we'll pick it up on the other side. All right, welcome back, everybody. Gary, I want to give you a chance to finish up your thought there.
Yeah, I was just talking about the Jesuits and the Basques, and I think I said Peter Farber was one of them, and that was wrong. That was Francis Xavier and Ignatius of Loyola. And what's interesting about the Basques or the Beziques is that they interpret everything through the seven sacred sciences, and were very much associated with the Pythagoras schools. So they are very much a secret society when they're created. And what's interesting about the Basques is that they actually call themselves Homo Atlantis in terms of a species, that they believe that they were the first ones to resettle after the flood, and they settled into the southwest of France area and northern Spain, and that they also started up post-Diluvian Egypt and Sumeria and Scythia after the flood, all important locations for these bloodlines, and that they are the most pure of the bloodlines. And so these are the guys who create the Jesuits, after the fall of the Templars, and they're there to be, on the sort of front line of what the Vatican is doing. So they go to the New World, so they can destroy whatever information they want, collect whatever they want, and be in total control, just as they were all around the world. And as the Templars were doing as well, to not quite to the same global reach, but in the same sort of venue. And so,
aren't they
they had a falling out with
as well, the RH negative bloodlines? Yeah.
They carry concentrations, depending on which study that you're looking at, concentrations from 50 to 80% as RH negative. And so they look at themselves as the most pure. And they had a falling out. Well, the language, nobody really knows where that comes from. And so it is an antediluvian language. And they, they're the first settlers in that region of Europe, and, after the flood. So they have this sort of ancient history that it's really kind of hard to ignore, and it gets intermixed into these royal bloodlines coming out of the Middle East, that settle Europe after, the sort of fall of a lot of the metallic dynasties, and as the giants are pushed out. And so that's why you have this diaspora of the Basque around the world, because there's this falling out on this power struggle. But yet you still have them as a significant part in terms of forming the Jesuits. And I think they'll play a role in the end time as well. It's hard to know how they're going to come down on this, but it's hard to ignore the fact that they've had such influence on our civilization. And so as we look at what goes on inside the Vatican, is that you can't separate bloodlines from the religious aspect. And that when we look at the Knights of Malta in particular, which is probably the most powerful sort of organization in the world, that has a larger reach, even though it still answers to the Rosicrucians, at the top of that pecking order, because you've got 50% representation of the purebloods at that level, and everybody sort of funnels into other groups below the Rosicrucians or directly into the Rosicrucians, let's say like the Bilderbergers, for example. And so when we look at how these groups are working together and you have this sense of royalty and bloodlines that's intermixed. Now let's look at that structure of that Knights of Malta. I mean, it is an initiatory organization. It's dedicated to John the Baptist, but the leaders of this organization have to come from a noble family, right? And most of the higher levels have to come from heraldic noble families of at least the bloodlines of that are 100 years. So the new bloods is very, very, very difficult to get into. And they are called basically a prince or a monarch. They are essentially king within this organization, and they're literally called the most high, eminent highness, and a prince and a grand master. So, and they also have international status. And when I talk about international status, they're also recognized by the UN as another entity and have standing status to observe and recognized as part of the UN. They also have membership in the EE. This is a secret society that ruled for a while as a fiefdom, granted to them by the viceroys of Sicily, and they kind of maintain this state status even after England takes over from control of the island. So not only do they have state status, they also have diplomatic relations with 107 other nations. And they have what they call holding cardinal status within the church that is only reserved for princes, and that's been established since 1630. And they also have what they call as a rank as a prince in the Holy Roman Empire, which is a key sort of understanding of what I was talking about earlier. So this organization has affected politics and the development of the West and things around the world for a very, very long time. And when England took control of Malta, that now made the English and the Windsor family the throne that is that they kind of answer to in kind of a way, but it's more of a respectful answer. And they made a special order that's called the Knights of St. John of Jerusalem for the Protestant side, which Queen Elizabeth reigns over, but it still answers to the Grand Master. So, and that also allows them through that organization to focus in on Protestantism and get, their moles into there as well. So that's kind of a quick overview of who the Knights of Malta are in terms of an organizational structure, but they're basically made up royals that are now controlled by the Jesuit organization.
Well, it certainly gets very in depth, and you do a masterful job of including this also in your Genesis 6 book and tracing it and relating, because it is very complicated. But again, there's an underlying linkage between all of them as far as those that are appointed and that sit on the thrones of the world. Even what we see during the 1500s, 1600s, you have cousins, ruling over different countries, and same blood families. Basically, the Queen of France is the sister of the King of England, and all these kind of different things, and the King and Queen of Spain and of Amsterdam, or all these, they're all seem to be blood connected. And even with the presidents today, here in America, they are also blood related to Queen Elizabeth. Even Barack Obama, who everybody thought was an outsider, also, George Bush, John Kerry, the list goes on and on. It seems like most of the presidents that here in America have been blood related to these particular families, which just shows that, with regard to the whole voting and, one person, one vote and a representative government, that all of that is a sham, and that what we see in the end game with the whole political system and the false left-right paradigm is that we are given the illusion of choice between two members of the same blood royal family, even here in America. And even though we don't have a public kingship, really the whole presidency and all of that is sort of, the same thing, just under different terms, different definitions. And so, can you speak about that as well? And do you know anything about the bloodline of Trump and where he stands with regard to all of this as well?
Yeah, I've not done any research into Trump, but there's no doubt he'll have some bloodlines, even though he seems to be on the outside looking in.
Right.
But typically you have most of the presidents, Obama's a little bit different here. His bloodlines go a little bit different direction, but the ones before that, they would have their bloodlines that all go back to King John and the Plantagenet family and the signing of the Magna Carta. And what's interesting about that is that this is the House of Anjou. And the House of Anjou is one of the main founding noble families to the Knights Templar, and obviously to these other orders like the Knights of Malta in around 1000 CE to 1100. And again, what's interesting about Anjou, and it's the folk of Anjou who is one of the founding members of the Knights Templar, along with people like the St. Clairs, who people don't know about, who's the battle partner of Hugh de Payan. The St. Clairs, or the Sinclairs as they come down the road, will be the ones who formed Freemasonry after the fall of the Knights Templar. And Godfrey de Bouillon is of course probably the most famous, who has bloodline connections from the last surviving member of the Merovingian family from Dagobert, which is this bloodline that they're going to secret. But the Anjou is the family that comes out of Sicily, as well as out of the Lorraine region. And the connection here is that when I said the Knights of Malta had a fiefdom, they answered to the royal families out of Sicily. So you have this sort of symbiotic relationship. And Anjou are also from the same region as de Bouillon de Payan, in the Lorraine region, where the double cross of Lorraine comes from in terms of the name. So this interconnection of these families and these names and these bloodlines to who actually rules is consistent all the way through. And of course, you have the Hanover bloodline, which is connected to the, at least according to Prince Charles, to Vlad the Impaler and the Ordo Draconis that I talked about earlier, that was set up in the early 1400s, put the Dragon Kings back on the thrones on continental Europe, is the family that is going to take over from the Stuart families, who become the Windsor family, right? And so you have this blood connection that sort of goes back into that direction as well. And of course, all of this is intermarried into the former bloodlines that go back through the Stuart kingships and the Unicorn dynasty, and then back to the Merovingians. I mean, that's all interwed into the Windsor family. And then when you're talking about, and I'm trying to pick up all the points you were talking about, all of these families in Europe, the best way to describe this is World War One, where you have whether or not it was the King of Spain who now holds the King of Jerusalem title and the double cross of Lorraine and the double eagle emblem, or it's the Kaisers out of Germany, or the Tsars out of Russia, or the Habsburg dynasty out of Austria at the time, who also held the King of Jerusalem kingships and titles. And you've got the Windsor family. You've got all of these that were literally cousins in World War One. So World War One was literally a war amongst cousins because they all intermarried to keep those bloodlines pure, because those genealogies establish their pedigree and right to rule and hierarchy in the occult organization. So they're going to track them and ennoble them as much as they can to keep improving, to hold their rank inside the organizations, whether secret or through royal bloodlines.
Yeah, and the whole intermarrying and taking on cousins and half sisters, that also passes on genetic anomalies and the whole schizoid nature, and we see a lot of just really sadistic behaviors amongst these families. The indulgence with blood and the drinking of it and the whole ritual that, again, we tie back to ancient times and what was established, and it even mentioned in the Bible, in Micah chapter 3, it speaks about them doing, as far as cutting up the flesh for the cauldron and drinking, eating up the flesh of the Most High's people, all kind of weirdness. But can you talk a little bit for those that don't know and haven't really looked into it, kind of the Templars and the Crusades and what they were after with regard to Jerusalem and Solomon's treasures and things like that, the inside story of all that?
Yeah, what's interesting about the Knights Templar and Godfrey de Bouillon and Hudipeon and all of the royal nobles that are going to form those original knights in Jerusalem is that they're there to protect pilgrims going to worship in Jerusalem, Christians from the Muslims. But what's really odd about all of that is that in 1033 or so, you had the formation of the Knights of St. John, who did this job, the Hospitaller. So this is the total rouge as to why you need a few knights when you already have this knight order in place. But it's to protect Jerusalem with these knight orders so that they can excavate and dig underneath the temple for things that they believed that were there, that they had from history coming out, coming out of history and the records thereof. So they're after, a number of things, like the Ark of the Covenant for one thing, obviously gold and silver and coins. They're also after some of the knowledge of Solomon and some of the application aspects of the seven sciences, and they believe that Solomon was a master mason and a black sorcerer, so that he was able to command demons and do a whole bunch of different things. So they were looking for that, and they were also looking for genealogies. And they excavated and they found seemingly what they wanted, and then they moved it back to Europe. And this is information that they've used to sort of blackmail the Roman Church ever since. And the Knights Templar were formed to keep Godfrey de Bouillon's bloodline secret, because he also believes in, or they believe in their belief system, that within that scion bloodlines, a grafting of bloodlines, not only is there the Nephilim bloodlines of many ennobled sort of Nephilim bloodlines and kingships and dynasties, is that they also believe that they have the bloodlines of King Saul in there, and the bloodlines of David, and the bloodlines of Jesus. And so this is greater scion of bloodlines that are part of that second cross, in terms of there's two bloodlines. There's a Nephilim bloodline, and then there's a Jewish bloodline, so to speak. And that's because they believe Jesus and Mary Magdalene had children, and that they don't believe that Jesus died on the cross, and that he survived and married Mary afterwards to have several kids. And the offspring of Josephus was taken to England, and it marries into the King Arthur and the Camelot dynasties. And then with Aragon and Amenemhat is the Merovingian. Through Aragon, crosses over to the Merovingians, which goes to Dagobert, which goes to Godfrey de Bouillon, which is part of one of the Antichrist bloodlines that is vying for the end time that they want to present. But obviously, with these bloodlines, you can develop several different arteries, sort of as you know, through the centuries. So these are all part of the secrets that they were trying to get at, including some of the lost sciences, and all of this they want to bring out in the end time as the pedigree of Antichrist, who is going to be, by the sounds of it, when we look at Scripture, part of the rise of Babylon before he turns on Babylon. And he's not going to be one of the 10 kings, because he's going to usurp power at about the midpoint of the last 7 years. But he's going to be the one that signs the covenant, or negotiates the covenant, that protects the nation of Israel, and also sets up this new world order that's going to have 10 kings, but is going to be overseen by Rome or Babylon, as I understand who Babylon is, until the 10 kings and Antichrist, who's rising in popularity in the first 3.5 years, decide they've had it with Babylon and Rome, and they're going to destroy her at the midpoint of the last 7 years. So understanding these relationships and bloodlines is very, very important if you're going to understand end time prophecy.
Yeah, and then, the Bible, it reveals in a very intricate manner the relationships of these bloodlines and their war against us, which is reason why I think it's very important to understand Genesis 3 and Genesis 6 and Daniel chapter 2, verse 43, where they shall intermingle themselves amongst the seed of men, and the whole story of the Nebuchadnezzar's dream and the statue, because we are still living out that prophecy, which is, one of the things that made me understand that the Bible was prophetic in nature, was the whole vision that Daniel was given, and how to interpret the dream, Nebuchadnezzar's dream, and this prophecy of the statue made of gold and silver and iron and brass and clay, and then how it relates to kingdoms that have come and gone since Nebuchadnezzar's time, which spans over thousands of years, and how, that just shows that the God who gave Daniel the vision and the interpretation of that Nebuchadnezzar's dream, that he sees the end from the beginning, and he knows all things, and has established everything to fulfill his own prophetic end. And so, and he is truly guiding and directing the course of all of history, and with regard to all the kingdoms that have come and gone, and even the selection of who Nebuchadnezzar and the Persian kings that came up, Darius and Cyrus and all of these kings. And so, can you talk a little bit about that as well? Because it seems like that the Rome and the 10 toes, that the popes are the continuation of the the Caesar, the whole line of Caesars from Roman times, and that it has just come to now be known as the Roman Catholic Church, but it's kind of the same thing and has the connections. And can you speak about that and elaborate some on those kind of things?
Well, I think a lot of people don't think the Nephilim are going to have any sort of impact on the end time. And, to me, there's a little bit of debate as to not whether or not they're going to have an impact, is how they're going to have an impact on the end time. And if they are going to have an impact on the end time, where and how is discussed in end time prophecy that, we might look for it and recognize it. And complicating that is you have the ancient Hebrew aspect, so you can look for it in some of the prophecies there. And then, but you have a Greek translation, which, has whole different meanings and not necessarily all the same words. But I think you can make some connections there. And if I look at what it says in Revelation, which is, the most significant aspect when it's talking about kings in the end time, and in relationship, I think, direct relationship with the kings mentioned in the metallic dynasties and beasts of Daniel is first of all, and let's say in Revelation 18:23, talks about the great men of the earth, right? And that derives from Greek megastanes, and that means grandes or magnates, great men, lords.
Real people, real radio.
Initiating the truth frequency.
This is Truth Frequency Radio.
All right, welcome back, everybody, for final segment. Before we got to break, we were speaking about what is the ongoing war, the enmity between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent that connects to Genesis 3:15, and that would be ongoing, as Christ says, let both grow together until the time of the end, and that at the end he would send the angels forth as reapers to gather the tares for burning and the wheat for preservation. But we see the dynamic of the giants against Israel playing out even in this day and age, and it seems like what we were talking about with the Ezekiel war is an ongoing after post flood, and then we have Goliath and his brothers and Saf that came up in that area from Bashan. If you would, Gary, go back just a little bit, because I think probably 10 seconds of what you were saying got cut off, and so I want to be sure that, because I think what you were talking about is important, and so if you would review a little bit and then elaborate further, and then we'll continue.
Yeah, I think I was making the connection that when we're talking about the Gog war is that we have to understand that the Gog and Magog and other giants were part of other histories around the world, and that these are the ones that the people of Japheth married into. And so these original giants, it's a good possibility that they were also put into the abyss. And in Revelation 9, which is the same timing as Joel 1 and 2 and Ezekiel 38 and 39 with the Gog war, I think we need to be prepared that there is a Nephilim influence, whether or not it's demonic and they are possessing a body or a clone body or a transhumanism body of some sort, that they're going to be part of the leaders that are leading this Gog war. So I think it's both the countries and the peoples and the relationship to the giants that are going to be part of that war in Ezekiel 38 and 39.
Right. Yes, we see also that in the scriptures, in the Bible, it always talks about the different angelic, these celestial entities which are appointed to be the overseers or the protectors of different nations. And that after the Tower of Babel, when they were split up into different tribes and tongues, that we see 72 angels appointed over, or 71, and then we have the Most High, the Godhead watching over Israel and being chosen for His people and for the people that the promised seed line, and also that the Messiah would come through. And so, can you speak about that as well, as far as the spiritual aspect of this war? Because even Paul said, we wrestle not against flesh and blood.
So when we talk about the spurious forces that are going to be doing all of this in the end time, whether it's the wars or it's forming world government, we need to understand that both in the religious side and in the secret society side, as you become the adepts in these organizations, is that you are in continual contact with what they would call spiritual guides or ascended masters or aliens or whatever you want to call them, that we would know them as Christians as demons and or fallen angels. And they receive instructions and information and knowledge from them and are guided and helped and supported by these rulers of the earth. And we also know that until Jesus comes to take the earth back, it's still under the dominion of Satan and all those who answer. So all of this is being supported, and the closer we get to the end time, the greater this support will be in this all-out push to have humankind rebel against the God of the Bible. And so we can never ignore the serpent seed aspect out of Genesis 3:15, which happens right after the Eden account, and the Nephilim and the fallen angels and the demons, which are the bodiless spirits of the original Nephilim, and the descendants of the Nephilim, both before and after the flood. They will all have an impact and are all pushing in this one direction to deceive humanity and to have them rebel against the God of the Bible. So they are the true power behind it. And the absolutely extraordinary thing in my mind is how do they think they can win? Well, I think the angels and the demons probably know they can't win. In fact, the angels, I'm pretty sure they know they can't win, but they were always trying to win a different realm where they could live separate from God, just as Isaiah 14 talks about. He wants to be like God. And everything they do is a counterfeit of God. So even as Antichrist comes to power, it has to be a counterfeit Armageddon. That's where the Gog war comes in, and that's why Judah, the people living in Israel, will accept Antichrist as the Messiah until the abomination. And so when we look at how this is going to be transpired, is that it's going to be as it has always been, that the demons and the fallen angels lie to humankind that they can win. So humans think that they can win, and it's the humans who do the debasing and slandering of God and do the dirty work. Because the demons and the angels know the power of God and only at the end, when there's no other choice, are they going to make that stand and fight. But of course, they're going to be thrown down to the earth in the last 3.5 years as well. Even the ones, so you've got the ones coming out of the abyss just before the last 3.5 years, and then in Revelation 12, the rest of the rebellious angels being thrown to the earth along with Satan. So everybody's going to be here, and it's going to be kind of visible, but it's kind of too late, because all of these humans who aren't going to be slaughtered by the beast empire, they've taken the mark, and they've already sworn their allegiance to fight against the God of the Bible. And then they'll hunt down and behead all of the people loyal to God who have not been raptured. So I think we cannot ever underestimate the forces at work that are not just the humankind. They are in the full support with Satan and all of his angels and all of their bag of tricks, and will bring everything they can to bear in the end time. Are you still there, Zen? Well, I don't seem
sorry about that.
Oh, that's okay. I was just going to carry on a little bit longer in case you were
go
cut
right
off.
ahead. Yeah, no worries.
But
yeah, go right ahead.
No, go ahead. You go ahead, Zen.
Sorry about
I had
that.
finished, so yeah.
Yeah, I was paused there, and so, anyways, with regard, to the end times, and all of what we're talking about, the esoteric aspects of what we're dealing with in reality, this is why it's, in my opinion, so very important to prioritize the kingdom and the study of the gospel, so that we can prepare our families and ourselves for those things that are coming, because we certainly want to be on the side of Christ, because we know that, of course, he wins in the end, and that he will protect his own. But what do you think as far as, because I know that even during like the flood of Noah's day, and also the Exodus, when the Israelites went into the wilderness for the 40 years, that even with preparation, that their provisions ran out, and that essentially they had to rely on God, and were even fed from the heavens by the manna and the quail, and the water from the rock, and that God is our supernatural protector, and also the one that will provide for us. But what do you recommend for people with regard to the coming of the end times and those things, that, because it says in the scriptures that these are the worst times that have ever been, since even the beginning. And so, besides reading the gospel and getting right with God, which are the most important things that people can do, and to make a serious study of his word, and to really commit to deeper, more intimate relationship with the Godhead, what do you recommend that people do, especially for those that are concerned about their loved ones or their family members? What kind of suggestions? Give them reading material, or what prayer, of course, that's one of the top lists. But what can people do for their family members, their loved ones, their children, those that they are concerned about in going into this time?
I think to raise awareness is the best, and not everybody is going to believe and convert and repent, and there's going to be doubters. But I think if we can make them aware of what is coming and what the Bible says, that when they start to see some of these events, it's not too right. And as we go in, there's not much we can do to protect ourselves. I mean, you've got two halves of this that are going on, and I know there's a lot of people who believe that we won't be here for any of the last 7 years, but that's not necessarily the case, and I hope it is the case. But my reading is that it's more, rapture is more after the mid-trib, but just before the wrath bowl, so that we're saved from the coming wrath.
Yeah, I agree.
And I think Scripture overwhelmingly says that. So you've got, in the first half, you've got rising Antichrist who signs the covenant. You've got Christians that are saying Antichrist, 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 but he's not crowned yet.
Yes.
And you've got Babylon in control at this point in time. And then you have the first Holocaust, or the first genocide of Babylon taking place against the Christians in the first 3.5 years, because we're considered obsolete, not worthy to be part of the new age and to evolve into gods, and we're obviously loyal to the evil one, is how they'll put us. We will be the evil ones. We'll be the criminals of the state. They will hunt us down, persecute us, and then you have the second half generation for the ones who aren't raptured and those who aren't taking the mark, and that period in between where will be hunted down again, this time by Antichrist. And then there's the wrath bowls. So those who aren't taken for rapture there is no real protection in the end time other than your faith in God. And what we're told is to have patient endurance, because what must take place will take place until the end. And it is going to happen. So it is a horrific period. I mean, the end of the story is good, but that whole process is not good.
Right.
And in terms of being involved in it. So people who are wishing for that, I would temper that a little bit. We all want the second coming of Jesus, but it also, we need to understand that in this modern age, how they can track people and the modern weapons is, they'll just come take us, and we'll disappear into the night or go into prisons or whatever. So it's not going to be a pleasant period, and there's not much you can do to prepare. And when you also understand that after the first year or two in the last 7 years, you start to have this tension going on in that New World Order, and war starting to break out, and some of the disasters that are coming, even though the Gog War hasn't come yet, because you've got like a wave of 25% of the earth and the people being destroyed. And then in Revelation 9, the trumpets, you've got a third, and we're not even talking about Armageddon. So at least half the world is destroyed, and people being destroyed in the first 3.5 years. How do you escape that? There's only one way to escape into, and that is in your faith, because it is going to happen, and rapture may not come in the first 3.5 years.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with you that I see that, because it says the last day, but that last day, I believe, is before the wrath of God is to be poured out on the wicked and those that are, not written into the books of life. And so that could be, right there at the midpoint where the reign of the Antichrist comes, as far as, because he is going to persecute and even slaughter his own. All those that are part of the New World Order, they think they're going to escape and to rule over and to, reign with him. They've got persecution coming too. They're expendable just like we are. And so, and
even more so, and they even write that in the writings, that they're going to slaughter all the liberal utopians, because they were just useful tools to get to where they wanted to be.
Yes, exactly. Exactly right. And it even says in the scriptures, it talks about how he will even turning his back on Mystery Babylon, that the church is destroyed, and all of the people, the New World Order is established in that way. And so it's always been that they eat their own, and so and Satan has no concern for those that follow him. He cares nothing for them.
No, he wants the more to die and more to be sentenced to the second death, and even worse to the lake of fire for those who take the mark. So he has no concern or empathy for those who follow him, and people will be surprised on all aspects. But as you say, they do eat their own, and there can only be one. And what's going to be very confusing for people in the end time is Jesus clearly says, not only is there going to be many false prophets, but there's going to be false Christs as well. So we're going to see competing antichrists in the end time. And I think God is part of that competing antichrist, just as you take Gog back to Greek in the New Testament, as it's labeled there, and it has a reference to an antichrist type figure. So I mean, it could be one of those antichrists that is leading this war, right? Now they lose, so it's not the true antichrist, but it just goes to show you that we have to be aware of there will be antichrist coming from all over the world trying to vie to be the top one. So that's where I think a lot of this tension comes from, and that comes from all of these different bloodlines from around the world. You know, you've got like the I'm trying to think of the Mahdi out of the Shia, right? They have their own Christ or Messiah-like figure. You've got Lord Maitreya and other names that come out of India, and I think that's going to cause part of these wars as we move into the midpoint of the last 7 years. So I think these antichrists are going to cause a lot of confusion, and we have to be careful because you just don't want to point at the first one we see and say that's antichrist, because we've been told there are many. So again, that will just discredit us. So
yeah, and just like, you know, with as we were talking about with the World War One, being amongst family members and cousins as they vie for power, it will be similar in the, you know, with these different factions at the end of days. But I want to ask you, Gary, what you think about the millennial reign, and do you see that? Because it says that, you know, we will be elevated back to our first estate, but then New Jerusalem comes here to the earth. Do you think that there's another, as far as another grouping of humanity, and do they go through the lessons that we have gone through in this lifetime? And is that what that 1,000-year reign is about? How do you see that playing out, or what do you see? What are your thoughts on the millennial reign?
Yeah, I look at the millennial reign of 1,000 years as a very interesting length of time, and we've heard and read, you know, a day is like 1,000 years with God, and we have this sort of timetable of 6,000 years that we've been around, and this would complete sort of the week of years allotted for the Adamites. So I think this 1,000 years does play out in a literal manner, and I think it's done so in a way where it has sort of this direct comparative compared to the previous 6,000 years. This is what happens when we don't follow the laws of God. But this happens when we follow the laws of God, and that'll be in direct contrast, right, for 1,000 years. And then Satan is released, and we have another Gog and Magog war. And so he incites rebellion again, and that is just sort of the final nail in the coffin. So even after this 1,000 years of complete peace and prosperity under the laws of God, into contrast of the other 6,000 years, some humans will still rebel, along with the descendants of Gog and Magog, I suppose. And so it's just sort of puts an end to it that there is only one way, and that's the way of God. All else leads to destruction and war. So I think it's just sort of that continual playing out, and then you have the final judgment and the second death, and Satan gets thrown into the lake of fire as well. And then we move on into another period where there's a new heavens and a new earth, and
eternal.
I don't know whether that's in a physical realm or a dimensional, realm of the spirit realm, but it's a whole situation. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, all that is interesting, and so it seems like, we see what it can really be like to be under the authority of God, and yet then there are still those that want to do it their own way and that choose to side with Satan and evil. And then God's just like, okay, if y'all can't get it together, that's it. No more chances, and it's a
exactly.
second death for you.
Yeah, exactly. And the irony is astounding because when you have the original rebellion, you have the angels that are created by God, and they understand God, they understand how good He is, and they're already immortal, and yet they rebel. Like, why would you rebel? And
Right.
this is played again as in nothing new under the sun, and clearly humankind is shown what it will be like, and yet there still will be some who rebel.
Yes. Right. We finally
Yeah.
get it right, and God establishes His kingdom, and everybody sees it and is witness to it, and yet they still want to do it their own way. I mean, it's just crazy.
Yes, it is. It is, and that's why the laws need to be written on our hearts, and it's almost like a new order, right?
Right. Yeah, because it says, for those that did not even know Him, but yet still believe, and then here in the millennial age, He'll be with us, and then still some refuse to believe. I mean, it's crazy. But Gary, we've got 2 minutes remaining. I want to give you a chance for final commentary.
Yeah, I think we covered a wide range of items tonight. I didn't touch that much on the dragon bloodlines, and I think the kings of the East are going to play a significant role. And when we look at the Li dynasty, where the Lis are still at the center of power in China today, and you've got permanent presidency basically set up for life again like a king in China, and understand that the Chinese have secret societies that run parallel to the Western societies, and they're considered equals in how they look at each other. This is the same organizational structure that happens all around the world, and that's why it will come together under this beast kingdom, because it's all about the beast bloodlines.
Absolutely. Hey, Gary, I just want to thank you, brother, for joining us and for coming on for the series of shows. I think we covered enormous amount of topics, and I know that it will, for those that listen, that they will be greatly blessed by all of our work and all of our conversations. And so, one final time, brother, give out your website, contact information, and where people can go to also follow your work and your blogs.
Yep. The best way to follow me and get a hold of me is through Facebook under Gary Wayne or under Gary Wayne in the Genesis 6 Conspiracy Group. So if you get a hold of me and have a question or need some information, you can message me or go onto my timeline or into the group, and I will respond to you. You can also get a hold of me through my website and email me through the website. And you can also follow me on Twitter. And on Facebook and Twitter is where I put out my weekly commentaries, and I usually give something for people to think about. And what I've been doing in the series lately has been on Isaiah 14, the rest of the story. And I put out one earlier this week, and I'll put one out in another few days that will expand on that. So give you good information to chew on it, and there's a whole bunch of good posts and commentaries all over there.